Good afternoon, guys. Good
Hey,
afternoon,
Nathan.
Ned.
How you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. Good afternoon, Parker. Thank you so much for coming and joining us, my friend.
Great to be here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can, yeah. We got you coming through loud and clear, my friend.
Great to be here.
Super excited to have you here. While we're just waiting for everybody to kind of key into the room, I was listening to some stuff. I think the most recent one was the Natalie Brunel podcast too, but I realized I don't actually know kind of how you came into this space. I was aware of your work and your articles through Unchained and then now moving over to Zaprite, but how did you even get into this Bitcoin world?
I guess it was 2016 and, I guess it was very serendipitous. I was working for a hedge fund and I was trying to understand at the time what would happen when the Fed unwound its balance sheet post-financial crisis, which it was starting to signal that it would. And then in the process of trying to understand why the Fed had to print all that money in order to understand why and how or what would happen when it unwound those emergency measures, I got introduced to safety in a moose when I was doing due diligence on a gold company. And that ultimately led down the path of learning about what, the rabbit hole questions about what money is, ultimately led me to Bitcoin and kind of through that process, multiple paths converged on Bitcoin being the solution to money printing.
That's beautiful. That's fantastic. And so you're working with a hedge fund. So I assume your background was then in finance beforehand?
Yeah, traditional finance. First out of school, worked at an investment bank doing mergers and acquisitions as an analyst, as a financial analyst, then worked in restructuring and turnaround management, helping companies that were in need of workout or restructuring, but more from the management side, not management consulting, but actually day-to-day running of the businesses and helping turn them around. And then that from there, ultimately, working on distressed credits, but more from the operating side is what ultimately led me to work at the hedge fund that I was at.
Very cool. Ben, I see we got you on stage. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm good, man. I couldn't miss out on a chat with Parker, so here I am.
Good to hear you.
Good to hear you virtually. I think the last time we got to chat at extent would have been in Prague.
I believe that's correct.
How was your jet lag after that, by the way?
It was bad.
That was your first time in Europe, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I feel like it took me, 5 days to adjust on either side. So, good 2 weeks, but it was a great 8 days in Prague. Loved hanging out with you, and that conference was phenomenal, and just hanging out with all the people there. Great people and great programming and all around great time. Recommended for everybody.
I was going to say, yeah, was there anything specific at Prague, Parker, that you took away or something that really caught your attention while you were there?
It was just a great Bitcoin conference. And I think great Bitcoin conferences are really made by the people. It's one of the things I love about BitBlock Boom in the States is that, the program's phenomenal, but the people's really what make it. And it was just a true Bitcoin conference with really high signal and minimal, if no noise.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. Now, Ed, do you have any questions or anything you want to lead us off here with Parker? If not, I've got a long list of things that I want to dive into that I don't know if we'll get through them all in the hour.
Yeah, no, we have a lot we could talk about. You've been very active in the space, and I guess first let's touch on Gradually Then Suddenly, because you just wrote that book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, disclosure, but I've heard nothing but good things about it, and I'm curious what the background was in writing it, the inspiration, and maybe a little bit about the book for someone that like me that hasn't read it.
Sure. So I like to think of Gradually Then Suddenly as a framework for understanding Bitcoin as money, and some of the background or inspiration for it I had, as I mentioned, just at the start of this, that my path to understanding Bitcoin was serendipitously getting to meet Safety in a Moose in 2016 while I was doing due diligence on a gold company. And he really helped me understand, kind of the questions about what is money, what makes one good, better, or worse than another, just kind of the history of money, which is something that even though I had an economics degree from college, never very naturally, it's like they don't teach money in school. And so before even getting to Bitcoin, he really opened my eyes up to understanding, why gold had emerged as money. And then that naturally translated to questions and, interests around Bitcoin that led me to Bitcoin. But Bitcoin had already started to click for me. And then Saif Dean had shared with me an early draft of the Bitcoin standard, which I read and provided comments on, but that really helped kind of all the pieces fit together for me. But from there, I really had to, so it was kind of like a, definitely light bulbs going off moment, kind of reading the Bitcoin standard, which I recommend for everybody. But as, myself being a very kind of rational, logic driven person, there was a lot that I still had to work through to continue to arrive back at the conclusion that Bitcoin was money and that it was that it was the permanent solution to inflation and the printing of money. And so I think about, or my goal for the book and my writing, which I had started in 2019 and then turned it into a book last year, is to accelerate people's understanding of Bitcoin as money specifically. And so I think about it as kind of like a middle ground between maybe the Bitcoin standard and mastering Bitcoin. I feel like you have to know the why of sound money to be able to see Bitcoin, but in order to stand on your own 2 feet and not rely on the opinions of anybody else, you have to know enough about how Bitcoin works to be able to think about it from first principles and to be able to reason through the hard questions yourselves rather than relying on anything that somebody else has said. So my book really lays out principles about the hard to answer questions, but really in a very logically ordered way. And, my hope is that for people whose minds think similarly to my own, everybody's minds work differently and certain pieces of content are going to work better for others, that my very logical approach to getting to the, hard question of is Bitcoin money or not, and does it obsolete all other forms of money, is really driven by this very hierarchical, ordered framework of thinking about it. And that if I've done my job, I'll help more people find Bitcoin with, in a faster way with less pain. So, kind of through the first 8 months of this year, been in the process of getting it in people's hands and just recorded the digital audiobook. It's not yet released, but that'll be the next thing to come, maybe in a month or so.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Parker. And I was going to say, you're doing the audiobook yourself. You went through all the narration there then?
Yeah, I did. I need to, it's in the process of being edited and produced. I had thought about a few different ways, and of course, have great appreciation for the Bitcoin Audible and Guy Swan. He read all of my articles when I first released them, which were the foundation for the book. But my thinking about recording it myself was that the way that I relate these ideas is very much based on my own personal journey and my own experience and my own thought processes. So I thought that it would land the best and most effectively if I read it myself. And that was a beatdown. So I now have much greater, I already had great respect for Bitcoin Audible. I now have even greater respect after having read for about 15 to 20 hours over 3 marathon sessions in the studio.
Yeah, audiobooks for me are like a lifesaver because I don't always have a lot of time to sit down and read something, but being able to put it on and put an earbud in and just listen to it is great. And I can imagine like the work that goes into narrating that and having to talk through it. So I'll probably pick up that audiobook though when it comes out because certainly interested in that. I saw Vangel has his hand up though, so I'm going to give him a chance to speak.
Yeah. Hi, Parker. It's nice to finally meet you or talk to you virtually, I guess. One thing I wanted to comment on is that kudos to getting on the Bitcoin train, because I find when talking to people, the hardest people to kind of help see the value of Bitcoin are people in the finance world or with economics degrees. I saw a quote recently. It said something, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but it says the hardest thing to convince, it's hard to convince someone of something when their means of feeding their family relies on them not understanding it. And I have a lot of people that work for, I know a lot of people that work for banks or, you know, companies like Merrill Lynch and those types of areas, and they're starting families, and it's the hardest conversations to have. So I have a question for you is how how would you approach those people that kind of view money printing as a good thing? And has anyone else, like friends that you've had in the same space or coworkers back when you were in the finance world, are they also on board?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like, myself personally, kind of having, I'd say, worked in the traditional finance space and, have a lot of friends there. I like to think that I was maybe not perfectly, but as close to perfectly predisposed to reject Bitcoin. And that, I think if there was one thing that would run counter to that, was that I was always somebody that, never, never took on debt. Like, just there was always some aversion that I personally had about going into debt, of just like paying for things as you go. And so that might, run counter to it, that maybe made me more predisposed to see Bitcoin. But from an educational standpoint, getting an economics degree from Duke, I was very, much schooled in the Keynesian or monetarist view that views central banking and active government involvement in various different ways, and centrally managing or smoothing over business cycles as being a net positive. It becomes very ingrained. And so I think ultimately for me, it was a positive because I was trained in one way of thinking, and then I had a baseline to at least, question, to say, okay, I understand one view of the world very well. Let me evaluate this other view that runs counter to it, to see whether it is more true or, invalidates the other. But at the same time, I personally think that it's less that people have a financial incentive not to understand it. I know that in certain ways that, can and is true, but I think it's more that it requires, people say that Bitcoin is humbling. It requires basically invalidating every assumption that you've assumed to be true, or that you've built other economic assumptions on top of. And that's very difficult to do. I think that part of it is born from a position of kind of almost being fearful of, if they were to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, worried that they're not going to be able to figure it out or understand it. And so there's a defense mechanism in it. And my recommendation to people is that, when approaching those people, is first and foremost, people who do not want to understand Bitcoin are never going to be open to learning about it. So if you have somebody that is aggressively against Bitcoin or anti-Bitcoin, or thinks that, they just believe in their bones that the printing of money is good for society, that whenever you talk to them about Bitcoin, their brain is not working in a way to understand what it is you're saying. They're just instantly processing, trying to figure out what the counter argument is. And almost by definition, your brain can't do that. Your brain can't explore, intellectually, why or how this thing Bitcoin might work and how it might be a net benefit. At the same time, it's trying to just answer, while you're speaking, answer in their heads why what you're saying is wrong. It can't do, that's literally two things at the same time. And so I think it's just accepting that you can't force Bitcoin on somebody who doesn't want to know, who isn't curious, who isn't, themselves seeking out the answers. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't, put lines in the water and try to entice people to be interested, but just saying that if people are actively trying to not know, they're never going to know, and that your time is better spent kind of focusing on the people who on their own account want to know. It's kind of like speaking to beating a dead horse, or, keep running into a brick wall. That being said, for the people that are interested, who might otherwise be inclined to have the view that money printing is good, what I encourage people to do is to, they're typically describing it based on, a view of an aggregate. And the way to break that down is to bring it to the individual level and to help them understand that, if left up to the individual decisions of 100 people, 99 out of 100 would choose to save in a form of money that can't be printed. And that each time they try to go back to, well, what about the aggregate? It's like, well, let's think about the individual decision point, because that's what we're here talking about between you and I, the person who would decide or not decide to store value in Bitcoin. And so, I would go back to, the Fed printing $5 trillion over the course of 2020 to 2022, 3 trillion, and food at the grocery store. Things that make it personal, things that get out of the abstract economic theory that can allow for logic to be absent, where you say, well, it was crazy, it's not going to end well, but they had to do it, and we need this exogenous entity to be able to flood the market with trillions of dollars on a moment's notice, because some economic theory says it does. But then if you think about the individual and their economic decision points of their wages and their ability to store purchasing power, it becomes a lot easier for someone to understand. So I would just encourage, one, don't beat a dead horse. Present opportunities for people that are curious to seek out answers. But then to your specific question, I'd say to focus on the micro rather than the macro, because the macro oftentimes doesn't actually include or is devoid of logic. And it's more difficult to run from the hard economic facts when you're thinking about individuals and their personal plights. And the more relatable you can be, and the more that they can discern what an individual would do and why someone would need sound money, and why storing purchasing power is better than not, and then extrapolate from there onto, well, if that's the case for one person, then it's the case for 99 out of 100, and the one not that it doesn't apply to might be the central banker. So always focus on the first principles.
I was going to say the idea of people who aren't open to it and maybe beating a dead horse reminds me of a recent conversation that you had, but I'll come to that a little bit later. Ben, you've had your hand up for a while here. What's on your mind? And also just a quick reminder to the audience. Anybody wants to come up, ask any of us a question, ask Parker a question, you want to comment or riff on what we're talking about, we'd love to have you come up here.
Yeah. So Parker, you're chatting about your gradual realization and the way that you structured your book in and around helping people grapple with Bitcoin from a perspective of, you got to understand a little bit about the how of Bitcoin to truly appreciate the why. When do you think we transcend that necessity? Because right now, obviously with the legacy system, people have just gotten to the point where they kind of take it for granted and they need to be convinced of something else. But I imagine in the future, there'll be just, people won't necessarily need to know the guts of this thing, but they might have a few quick points where they know why Bitcoin happened. Oh, this cap supply. Oh, nobody can shut it down. Like a few things like that, but they won't need to know how those things are possible necessarily, because there'll be a track record. What do you think the tipping point for that will be, if you think that's where we're headed?
I do agree with you that's where we're headed. An analogy that I would use is similar to the telephone, or maybe to the telephone in the sense of no one really has to understand how the telephone works in order to use the telephone. And I think that is where we're heading. Maybe on the risk spectrum, it's more like flying on an airplane. And, a lot of people don't know how an airplane works, but, there's not a lot of risk to you to picking up the phone and using it. There is risk to you of getting on an airplane and it going wrong. And then enough people go before you and there's enough confidence that, hey, this thing really works. As that translates to Bitcoin, it's, will this actually store my purchasing power or not? Because if it doesn't, there's actually a serious risk to you. And I think that, or the framework that I would use to think about it is, what percentage of the population needs to have evaluated Bitcoin consciously or subconsciously. And consciously is the evaluation of, okay, there's supposed to be 21 million Bitcoin, and what's his name? Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan was on CNBC, not this year, but last year, saying, well, how do we know that at the end, there's only going to be 21 million, but when it gets to the 21 million, that a picture of Satoshi isn't going to pop out and say, ha ha, like we're still printing money. And so, somebody like Jamie Dimon hasn't, he's keyed in on the fact that 21 million is relevant, but he still needs to have some understanding of how that's possible without the need for trust, and that it's not dependent on anyone for someone like himself to be able to start saving in Bitcoin. So one point is we're not there yet. The other point is that the way I think about it from a framework is, on a percentage basis, is it's probably not more than 1 out of 20 people. That once 1 out of 20, maybe even less than that, that it might be something like 1 out of 50, 2% of people. Once 2 to 5% of the population has formed a consensus, and it's going to be the people who have a combination of the greatest access to information as well as wealth to store and something to lose if wealth is lost. And again, to, I guess, provide nuance to that, is that I don't really view money as true wealth. It is designed to store wealth, but it is a tool to actually accumulate physical capital by coordinating trade, which might be nuanced. But the point being that it's going to be people who have value to store, and the people who have access to the greatest amount of information. And that once 2 to 5% of the population has formed a consensus, Bitcoin is going to be a lot easier for everybody else to understand. It's just going to work. And it's going to be currency A versus currency B, and no other currencies are working, and you have to adopt Bitcoin because you need to trade, and then you need to exchange the value that you've traded for something in the future. And Bitcoin, in a very observable way, is the economic good that's doing that best. And in my view, again, it's somewhere between 2 out of 100 people and 5 out of 100 people. And I don't think that we're necessarily to one, but I think that is something that happens in the next, two Bitcoin halvings, because the Fed's going to have to print a lot more money between then and now. And the rate of issuance for Bitcoin will be less than 0.5% a year by then.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Parker. Thank you. Ben, did you have anything you want to add to that quickly?
I mean, yeah, I'm just always curious to hear where people believe that threshold will be hit, and yeah, I mean, I will say, I guess, to Parker's point here, things have moved a lot quicker on a much grander scale than I would have assumed this quickly. To see again, Bitcoin being already a political issue on a presidential level is it came at least a halving sooner than I thought it would. And so, yeah, I can only imagine what, when you stack a couple more epochs on top of this, what will be happening.
Completely agree. Monica, I see that you came up here. Did you have a question for anybody up there on stage?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for bringing me up. Parker, we met in Dallas at BitBlock Boom, and I came and I spoke to you about your cover. I'm an artist.
Yeah, I remember that. Great to speak to you again.
Yes, I'm so happy. I usually don't come to spaces, but I saw you were there, and I'm like, yes, because first of all, thank you for making the audiobook. I already read the book because I bought it at Safe House, but I need the audio. I need to get it into my brain. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Now I want to, because you did tell me a little bit about the cover, and I think it will be amiss if you don't let other people talk about the process. I'm an artist, and I so much appreciate what you did. And it's not just you pick up an image, you commission an artist to do something that it was coming from you, and the way it developed. And it's so poignant. Like I really appreciate it as an artist. So if you can share a little bit about that, because when you told me, I think more people should know.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And it was, so I'm happy to share that. So for people who aren't, I guess I'm sure a lot of people listening are familiar with the book, but I'll just kind of describe the creative process. That one, I when I was creating the cover for the book, I wanted something completely unique that would, both be unique and something that was unique to the book. And I had commissioned a Bitcoin artist who he works under a pseudonym. So very appropriately, he works under the pseudonym Proof of Paint. You can find him on Twitter. I think it's just Proof of Paint. But if you search Proof of Paint on Twitter, you'll find him. Or if you pick up a copy of the book or access it digitally on the Nakamoto Institute, you can find him. But so it was the inspiration for the idea was that Bitcoin is difficult to see, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And as Bitcoin comes into focus, you realize that both you are in a fiat storm and that Bitcoin is not just about making money, that it's about freedom, and that the freedom that sound money provides, and really that freedom comes from the ability to deliver value to others, and then have that value that you've delivered to others in the past be stored into the future, such that you can benefit from a range of choice via trade. And so on the front cover, there's an individual in the storm in a boat rowing, and he's trying to get out of the storm. And that's the front cover. So he's basically in the fiat storm looking for the way out. And then the storm's, and suddenly on the turn of the cover and then on the back cover, the dark turns to light, the storm turns to calm water. The person in the boat is further on his journey, looking towards the light and towards an emblem of freedom, and kind of in a calm and relaxed view. And then there's an individual viewing the painting, and the individual viewing the painting is designed to be the same individual at different points, but basically being able to see the full picture, that you can't see that you are in a fiat storm until you see Bitcoin. And once you see Bitcoin, then later down your journey, you can see the full picture that fiat is the root of a lot of problems in society. So, I appreciate you asking that question. A lot of thought was put into it. We developed the idea and concept over 4 to 6 months, and it delayed the book, but ultimately was the perfect finishing touch for it. So, really appreciate Proof of Paint and everything that he did to help pull it together.
I had no idea about that. Thank you so much, Monica, for asking that question. I always admired the artwork, but I had never actually taken the time to give it the thought that it probably deserved in terms of what the symbolism and what the meaning of it was. And the idea of going from the start of the book and then finding the light at the end of it, I think is absolutely beautiful. Kind of similarly on that topic then, Parker, I'm curious because I know that the book was largely based on essays and articles that you had already written. I was wondering during the kind of culmination, when you were pulling everything together, if there's anything that you maybe changed your mind on from first writing it, or anything that kind of surprised you or popped up along the way.
The short answer, the good thing about that is the short answer is no. I went back and I did improve all of the pieces and better knit them together, and took out unnecessary redundancy, so that individually each of the pieces, except for maybe a few, like my writing improved quite a bit over the course of writing. So the later pieces needed less work than the early pieces. I think, one of the things that I realized, like earlier on in my writing, I don't want to say I hedged, but I was more conscious for the audience to say things like, and I only think I did this one or two times, but like, if Bitcoin fails, and, it's becoming less and less likely that it does, I'd even mentioned that I was like, well, I kind of wish I hadn't said that. But then the reality was that I actually improved my own understanding of Bitcoin through the process of writing it. And I felt like it would have been dishonest to take those pieces out. And so I left them in. But I think that's also probably just organic, that, one of the reasons, in addition to helping other people understand Bitcoin, I had these ideas in my head that I had connected kind of from a combination of principally reading the Bitcoin Standard and mastering Bitcoin, that were left kind of unformed. Like I had connected the dots, but then they weren't. There wasn't some place where I could just read a logical flow of it. And so actually the process of writing did help me understand, it was like a conclusion that I had that I believed or knew to be true, but then I had to work backwards to say, okay, well, if this conclusion is true, then I need to logically order why it is the case. And so through that writing process, my, not only was my ability to communicate those concepts improved, but it actually improved my own understanding and hardened my own understanding. So there was nothing that I read and was like, oh, that was actually wrong. It was like, because everything that I wrote was based on principles, and all the principles I believe to still be true. And I kind of cover a range of the first principles of money, the, kind of like why money converges to one, kind of all the common misconceptions about Bitcoin, why it's too volatile, why it doesn't waste energy, why it's not too slow, why it's not for criminals, why it can't be banned, and then Bitcoin versus the dollar. So they're really, I was happy to find there weren't really ideas that I, there were no fundamental ideas that I was like, oh, there was a better way to explain this. It was like the core principles were all, at least when I revisited it last year, kind of 4 years later, felt the same. There was like one piece, Bitcoin is not a pyramid scheme, where I felt like I did need to do a better job of, really hammering why it wasn't a pyramid scheme, which it isn't clearly. But yeah, no, I'm happy to, address any single questions, but, the main thing was that, early on, I, kind of leave it open that, there might still be an outcome where it fails. And maybe today there still is, it's just, it's becoming smaller and smaller. And, but, even though I was a little bit like torn whether I leave those kind of uncertainties in, I felt like it was the more honest thing to do to leave them in, because it was what I must have thought at the time.
It's always fascinating because as soon as you have to actually like put pen to paper, or you have to teach somebody something, concepts that you even thought that you really understood, you have to further refine them to be able to communicate that effectively to someone else. I can definitely empathize with that there.
Yeah, no, I would put ideas down on paper. Like the way I describe it is like conclusions I knew or at least thought to be true. That would be the inspiration to writing something like, Bitcoin's not too volatile. Well, I've come to the conclusion why it's not too volatile, but now I need to be able to communicate this to somebody else. And so I'd start writing, and then I'd be like, well, that's not the right way to explain this. So there's something logically missing here. And I just keep working at it until it was what I viewed to be the right logical approach to explaining that concept. And then I thought, well, hey, if I hadn't first written this down, like whatever the first thing that would have come out of my head would have been the first thing that I would have said to somebody. And I'm not going to be in a position to effectively communicate unless I write it out. And so whether it's ideas around Bitcoin, I highly encourage people to write, even if it's, even if you don't plan to publish it, maybe you do, and maybe you publish it on a blog, but, or maybe it has nothing to do with Bitcoin. It is the writing process is a really valuable process to refine the ideas that are in your head. And that if you can do that on paper and be an honest challenger of like rigor in terms of, are you actually saying what your mind is thinking, and not, publishing or just not putting, a conclusion or bow on it until you're confident that you've actually said what you wanted to say in the precise way that you wanted to say it.
That's beautiful. Ben and Monica, I see you both have your hands up. Ben, let's go with you first, buddy.
I'll see what Monica has to say first, because I don't want to derail the conversation that's happening right now, but I did want to dive into a little bit of Zaprite and what's been going on over there, because that's definitely my wheelhouse. But Monica, I'll toss it to you first, because if you were going to tag on to what Parker was already saying, I'll let you do that first.
And it's a good idea to talk about Zaprite. So I want to say something, Parker. I see that the way you work is a very artistic, because you're describing your process of writing. I'm a writer as well, and do fine art. And so it's your encouragement for people to kind of go back and to the thoughts, because it's the only way to actually be able to prove if we can understand something. You write, you ask questions, you read again. That's why I need your audiobook, because I read it, but I need to listen to it so it really goes deep into it, and then I can write about it, and then I know that I know. So I really appreciate the part of the art that you use more like your abstract way of thinking when you commission somebody, but then you use the logical part about the writing. And as a joke, I'm part of Saifuddin seminars. And I really hate what he did with the modern art chapter of the Bitcoin standard. So I'm always saying, you should have done like Park and like understand art from another perspective. So I really, really appreciate that you understand art from that perspective, because I don't think a lot of Bitcoiners are really connected to art, not because they are not, but maybe they don't know it. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you again. And by the way, your slides, when you present them, are the best. I always come back and ask you for the slides. You have a very interesting way to conveying information. So I'm a huge fan. Thank you again.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I will just, I remember like when Safe sent me an early draft, I remember one of my comments was like, you can really drop the thing about art. And in like in a large part, it might be true. And I know that Jimmy talked about it too, but it was just a funny thing that, you know, it's like, this is kind of besides the point. I think you're going to lose some people here. But, you know, one of the things I've increasingly appreciated about Safe is that he's unapologetic, and you know, some people love him and hate him, but I have great appreciation for him. And you know, some people are going to have to get past certain things, like you obviously did, of having different opinions about art, but then still appreciating his greater work. So appreciate you saying that about my work, and also sharing your perspective.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you know, one should see people as humans. So we have certain things or not. So we always laugh, because I know he's writing his next book, and I say, I know it's about modern art. And he goes, no. So I just tease him. It's like the best way that I have about teasing him, because everything else I kind of agree. So is good. So I hope I see you again in another conference or something. Thank you again, Parker.
Yeah, same.
Ben, why don't you kick us off on Zaprite?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to bring this in as a topic of conversation, obviously, because my wheelhouse is dealing with the tools day to day, all of the awesome little things that as a Bitcoiner you can use to continue to make yourself and your life easier as you navigate using Bitcoin more and more in your daily life. And so I've been, putting together different tools and services over the years to enable myself to effectively live on Bitcoin since 2020. And so, that's been great. But it's always been, a little bit of jumping through hoops and matrixing my way throughout, life on Bitcoin. What I will say is, with the advent of Zaprite, my God, has it streamlined so much for me. I use it so often, so regularly. It's such an integral part of me being able to earn and live on Bitcoin in a way that just works seamlessly. So maybe before I get into any specifics, Parker, could you, I guess, kind of outline what you guys are doing at Zaprite and what the grand vision is?
Sure. And I appreciate you saying that. And, I will say that, me working on Zaprite was born out of needing something that I, needed myself for my book that didn't exist. And that, one of the ways that, particularly as entrepreneurs and people that are out there trying to solve problems for other people, that one of the ways that I view, kind of early success for measuring that is if we can put a solution in the market that solves a problem for you, Ben, it's like that lets us know that that what we think the market needs, the market does need. It's like, if you're someone that's highly sophisticated and been around and looking at all the tools, and then we put something out in the world and say, that's what I need, and that you appreciate it. We have great appreciation for that. We love getting your feedback, and we value you. So I just wanted to say that from the start. So for the audience, when I say what we're building is Zaprite, and what really inspired me to work on Zaprite, I didn't found Zaprite. I joined John McGill, myself and Will did at the same time. We're a small team, but we joined very early. And the idea was that we seamlessly needed a way to accept both Bitcoin and fiat, and that the right way to incentivize people to pay us in Bitcoin is to give our customers, and in my case, thinking about someone buying a book, an easy way to pay us in Bitcoin, but in a way that we don't have to have a conversation about it. And the way to do that is to make it very seamless and integrated in one unified checkout to receive Bitcoin and fiat side by side, but in a way that doesn't disadvantage Bitcoin or incorporate it in a checkout flow as a second or third class citizen, but to put it on equal footing and to then create the tools that actually incentivize people to pay in Bitcoin without having to have a conversation. So when we think about what Zaprite is, and then the other key thing about it is that it's non-custodial. But non-custodial doesn't mean just for people holding their own keys. It means that we at Zaprite never touch our customers' money. We don't have to sit in the middle as a financial intermediary, such that if somebody runs their own Lightning node, uses Liquid, holds their own keys, they can use Zaprite. Or if somebody needs a custodian like Strike or would prefer that type of setup, they can connect a Strike account to Zaprite. And so we are a wallet agnostic Bitcoin payment gateway that incorporates fiat. So you can connect a Strike account or a Stripe account, a Square account, a PayPal, Venmo account to Zaprite, such that your fiat methods to be paid are right there. But then just as easily, you connect a Bitcoin wallet, a Bitcoin node, a Strike account with a K. We've got probably about 25 integrations to this point. And then we build the tools on top of that, like invoices or payment links. We just released a point of sale to basically, when you get to the point of payment, and I think about it with me and my customers, or Ben and his customers, they get there to the page to pay and they just see Bitcoin's there available. You don't have to have a conversation about it. You don't have to have a conversation with your customer to say, do you want to pay me in Bitcoin? You just send the same way to be paid to all of them. And so we're in the very early stages of Zaprite, but the idea is you don't need to change the way that you're already custodying Bitcoin or securing Bitcoin. We can make the Bitcoin go directly there. And the way that we incentivize you to receive more Bitcoin payments is to make it really easy to accept Bitcoin side by side with fiat, and then add features to tip the scale to allow your customers to clearly know that you would prefer to be paid in Bitcoin.
That's
Happy
awesome. I'm actually curious if you can touch on, because the recent POS setup I think is absolutely fantastic for that ease of use, for that simplicity with if you're working with like a brick and mortar store, especially as well too. I'm curious if you could touch on that, and then maybe anything else you guys have planned coming down the pipe.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think we're recognizing when it comes to our point of sale is that we delivered the point of sale because we just had so many of our existing customers asking for it, and we viewed it as something that really complements everything else about Zaprite. We don't see it as a replacement for just yet for a Square terminal or a Toast terminal or a Clover terminal, but for a lot of people that are selling goods and services in person, that specifically want Bitcoin and have a range of customers that are paying. And realistically, someone's accepting Bitcoin as payment, and Ben's on one end of the spectrum, and I even might be on one end of the spectrum. But a lot of businesses that want to accept Bitcoin as payment, they do it knowing that only a couple percentage points of their revenue is going to be in Bitcoin to start, but they know that that's going to grow maybe from 1% to 5% or 5% to 10%, and it's just going to grow each year, and they want to invest around that. And that for a lot of those customers, they wanted an easy way that if they were in person at a conference or at a farmer's market, that there was a tool that would be very functional, like a Square terminal, albeit that what we really think to really address customers in a scalable way, brick and mortar will either need direct integrations with something like a Square or a Clover or a Toast, but that the way that we view our job, or what we're here to do, is to help people be paid in Bitcoin, and that the way that we can control that best is where we can influence the buyer's decision, and the way that we can influence the buyer's decision is where we can control that experience and environment. And so we don't, necessarily think, we think it's a first step in a process. We don't think it, it's like, don't think of Zaprite as fully eliminating your need. If you're a Square merchant, we'd love to get Zaprite into Square, or over time we'll build more tools, but I don't want people to think that that it just allows for the jettisoning of all of that. It's a first step, and it's largely to help customers that, might have a need for Zaprite using, one of our other tools, and that this just makes it that much more valuable. And that's how we think about it generally. And so, what's to come? We're currently, we're focused on adding more ways to be paid in Bitcoin. So we are going to work on delivering a BTC Pay plugin. Oftentimes people think about them as I'd say competitive to each other, but we have a lot of customers that want to use things like Zaprite invoices, or even potentially a Zaprite point of sale with a BTC Pay server. So that is something that we're going to deliver. We also recognize that peer-to-peer payments is a very early use case of Bitcoin as commerce. So we plan to deliver a solution to make it easy. Ben and I are in Prague, and we're going out to restaurants, and one person pays and 9 people need to get paid back. That application is still not yet solved, and we think we're in a very great position at Zaprite to be able to use all of the same heuristics and architecture and everything that we have to be able to deliver a great solution there. And then we have an API. And so, we basically are going to continue to build out the capabilities of our API. That's going to be something that happens over the, consistently. That will never end, but over the next 3-4 months, improving the capabilities of that, adding things like auto payments. We want to be able to add auto payments, not just for fiat, but also Bitcoin. And we have ideas how we're going to do that. So those are the few of the things. Like, ultimately, the goal is that if you have a merchant and they are using Zaprite to accept Bitcoin and fiat, we want to drive Bitcoin sales. And the more we can deliver that customer experience on the buyer side to be able to say, I'm going to pay you in Bitcoin, the more we help the merchant save. And it's not just a matter of savings, but it's strengthening their business by appealing to more and more customers that have Bitcoin. And so everything that we're doing is guiding, around that as kind of our North Star.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, sir. It's a fantastic product that you guys have built, and I'm actually really excited for everything else coming down the line. Kind of segueing off that a little bit, I'm kind of curious on your current view of just the layer 2 options, Lightning specifically, even that's out there for these smaller purchases back and forth. I'm wondering if you've looked at like something like Arc, or where you even think the infrastructure and the use case for it is going to go in the future, being someone who's building directly in this space.
So I'll use that as the opportunity to say that one, we build out and will build out to everything that Bitcoiners use and like, and that, we've got support for Liquid, and if Liquid wallets have XPub support, we'll build in XPub support for Liquid. Right now, on-chain and Lightning are predominantly what people want and use. And in my view, it works. And I think that, all of our energy goes into how do we, there's 19.7, 19.8 million Bitcoin that are in circulation. How do we deliver value to people that are using Bitcoin or will use Bitcoin? When the next Bitcoin adoption wave happens, there's going to be 10x number of people that are demanding Bitcoin and need Bitcoin related services. How can we deliver value right now without changing Bitcoin? And so much of our focus and energy is around building out tools that augment the protocol level rails that already exist and the wallets that already exist. And so a lot of that focus is on on-chain and Lightning. One of the observations about building Zaprite and focus on payments is, our on-chain applications are just as popular as Lightning. I sent a $10 transaction on chain today because I was trying to close out a wallet, but the transaction fee was less than a credit card fee. So one of that point being that a lot of people that particularly say using our invoices, they need easy to use tools to receive payments on chain. And a lot of times when people think about payments, they skip over on chain. And it's like you can achieve on chain payments non-custodially a lot easier than you can receive Lightning payments. I'm someone who likes to say, what's the saying, that the people who, the reports of Lightning's death are greatly exaggerated. Lightning's working, and it might work a lot better today in a custodial environment, but it works, and it works beautifully from a technical level. And we have customers that use non-custodial Lightning every day too. It's just logical that the non-custodial solutions and how seamless those are going to improve over time, just like Mt. Gox existed before it got hacked, and then there were a ton of hardware wallets that made it easy for people to custody Bitcoin, and then there were multi-sig solutions. So everything is a progression. And so in our view, it's, we're less focused on, is Arc an interesting solution? It's like, if people start to use Arc, we'll support Arc. But right now, we're trying to get more merchants to start saying, pay me in Bitcoin today. And so we have to rely on the things that are available. And I also think it's a good philosophy, which is you can add a ton of value to that 19.8 million Bitcoin that is in circulation without changing Bitcoin at all. And that's what we're trying to do at Zaprite. It doesn't mean that we, aren't excited for potential future changes, but our customers and growing the universe of people that accept Bitcoin as payment, we can't depend on Bitcoin changing to be able to deliver tools. That's just not a good, that's not a good business strategy, because Bitcoin is so difficult to change. And so it's more about improving capabilities around things like building auto payments on Lightning, or building paywalls on Lightning, or in our case, incentivizing people to build tools like paywalls on Lightning using our API, and making our API really easy for developers to basically be in a position where they can access fiat rails and Bitcoin rails side by side. And so that's really where our focus is. And we're Lightning works every day, and it gets better and better every day, and the tools to use it non-custodial will get better. And so that's really where our energy is, to be able to develop the applications upon rails that are working today, so that we can, if we 10x the number of people that are accepting Bitcoin as payment, well, then the amount of capital people can put back into developing more tools to build more rails just gets better and better from there. So it's not that I'm against, quote, improving Bitcoin by changing it, but at the same time, we have to improve it without it at the same time. And so very bullish on the prospects of Lightning and Fediment. We'll incorporate Fediment-based wallets when and as they're available. I think that's probably the next, clear line of path to improvements in different ways for people to be paid and to improve privacy. So I'd say it's, not skipping over on chain, continuing to develop tools and capabilities around Lightning without, having to change Bitcoin at all, Fediments, and then because they're there today, and then, the unknown of what might come, 4 or 5 years down the line. We've got to increase the amount of businesses accepting Bitcoin by 10x and 100x in the next 4 years if we're doing our job. So we can't depend on those type of tools, if that makes sense.
No, totally. Absolutely makes sense. And I can see, Evangeline, you got your hand up there, but I'm just going to read this one question from the audience here. Is there an easy payment solution for website owners? Bitcoin cart so far, I have to convert an invoice over from fiat, would like to integrate. I don't know if Parker, if you can speak to that quickly.
I'm not sure if that is a question about, we get a lot of requests about, do you help me receive fiat and automatically convert it to Bitcoin? I'm not sure if do you think that's what that question is asking?
I was not quite clear. I apologize for Farmer. I can't quite. Is there an easy payment solution for website owners? Bitcoin cart so far, I have to convert an invoice over from fiat, would like it integrated.
I view that as, and this would be something that I'd be interested in as well, but being able to have like a cart system, like multiple products, put them in a cart, create a final invoice for all of the products, and then create a Bitcoin invoice for that.
Yeah, to this point, we've been resistant about building a cart just because we look at, we've built a integration with WooCommerce, and we've also working on Shopify. The challenge of that is, something like WooCommerce, which it's the most flexible. So we're able to deliver the best, honestly, it's still limited in its experience, but the best experience because we can provide that Zaprite checkout that has fiat side by side with Bitcoin. Something like Shopify is much more restrictive. And that's slowly led us down this path of saying, well, maybe we do need to develop our own cart. But then the question is, well, we're not going to out Shopify. And so it's really about kind of focusing our energy around the use cases where we have real customers, where we can control the aggregate experience to ultimately drive Bitcoin sales. And part of the kind of challenge on this point is, there's a value to Shopify that, I don't envision Zaprite replacing, as just an example. But that until someone like Shopify values Bitcoin, our ability to deliver value there is inherently limited because we can't provide a great Bitcoin payment experience if the people who control the platform don't value Bitcoin. And so we think our time is better spent focusing on the applications where we can control the aggregate experience so that we can deliver the value of really not just enabling Bitcoin sales, but driving more and more percentage of your sales in Bitcoin. And so it doesn't mean, but it has got us to say, okay, well, maybe within Zaprite, we should build a very basic cart such that if someone was using our payment links or someone had a business that had something like 10 to 20 different products, we could be able to service those people and deliver that great experience. So we are contemplating that now because it is driven by, well, we need to control the things we can control. And it's going to be hard to get people who don't understand Bitcoin as an organization to invest themselves in a great Bitcoin payments experience. So short answer, that doesn't really exist now. WooCommerce and our WooCommerce plus Zaprite is probably the best, but we'll continue to try to either find platforms to integrate Zaprite into where we think we can deliver a great experience, or deliver some very basic cart features ourselves that might not satisfy the most complicated of businesses, but would for kind of small to medium size.
I just want to throw out my pitch, my case for you, if I can.
Okay.
This is my use case. My use case is literally I like hosting workshops. And so those workshops will have a ticket. Oftentimes there's different parts to the workshop. So I'll do like one on one topic and one on the other, and they'll run in, one after the other. And then on top of that, some people will want to purchase hardware to pick up at the event as well. So there may be like a few items somebody might want to tick off at the same time. And then they just need a singular invoice so that I can see on the other end, what did they purchase? What tickets did they get? What devices do I need to make sure are there for them on pickup? Basically, just that functionality it would be my use case if it were available.
Understand it. And that is something that I failed to mention on the things that we're working on. We are going to work on more features around tickets now, where like the idea that you could buy different types of tickets and then be able to pay for those at once and actually have tickets be issued. So that would be like the beginning of the very basics of a cart-like feature set. So we are going to be adding more and more feature-rich tools around the issuance and check-in of tickets native to Zaprite. That's very high on the priorities. We just released one to have like a max inventory as an example, but there will be a lot more to come on the ticket side. But I do hear you, Ben, and we will. That something like that is something that is within the scope that we could reasonably deliver. Something basic like that allows people to choose from a few different options, add them up, and then pay, and then you have the records of everything that the person bought.
Would that come through the payment links portal? Is that where it would likely be integrated, or something separate?
To start, it would probably be like its own. It'd be called like tickets. Something specific to tickets, and then we'd probably add an increment to that, something that would allow you to be able to have a cart. So like think about it as like the ticket would be a specialized kind of payment link, but it would have enough specialization that it would need to stand on its own. And then potentially having the way to add more than just, a few tickets to a checkout, some other good or service that you're selling, like a product.
Perfect. Yeah. So it could be like ticket, like event only, or event and hardware would be like the different ticket types. Or I can drift. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I want to be respectful of Parker's time, but I do have like at least 2 questions I want to fit in super quick if I can, Parker, if you got just an extra couple minutes here for us. Perfect. I wanted to at least briefly ask, because we spoke earlier about the importance of writing, which would lead me to think that you're still actively doing it. And I was wondering if there's anything else on the horizon that we may see from you in terms of a book, something that you might be thinking about or planning for the future that you might want to share, you might want to not. And then the other one I wanted to at least touch on briefly was I thoroughly enjoyed your conversation with Jeff Snyder, as frustrating as it was. And I was curious if even after the fact, if you had any sort of thoughts on that conversation. And it reminded me earlier of talking about people who just aren't open to these kind of discussions.
Okay, so first on the writing, I've actually been thinking I need to write more. I don't think another book is in the cards. I think that as of right now, what I'm really passionate about is Zaprite, and I don't have any reason to believe that will change. And getting more people to be in a position to easily say yes to the proposition of they want to accept Bitcoin payments, and here's an easy to use tool. So that's really where 80 to 90% of my professional energy is going, and the remainder is going to getting Gradually Then Suddenly in more people's hands. So that's just where it's at. But at the same time, I have, I do feel like I just need to write more in blog form. So we'll likely be writing on concepts of Bitcoin payments, not really from a product standpoint, but just why payments are important and how people may be thinking about the value proposition of that. So I do anticipate writing more on my blog, which is gradually then suddenly.xyz. I think, in terms of just, I don't have any plans to write another book, but I have thought, because I've gotten the question a lot of like what I might write on. And I was, in the last couple of weeks, I thought, well, if I were to write another book, it would probably be on the concepts of Bitcoin and energy, because I feel like, and not specifically mining, but the relationship between money and energy, and how Bitcoin fits in. And because energy, if there's two things that people take for granted that are both complicated and poorly understood, I think there are those 2 things, money and energy. So, kind of the relationship between Bitcoin and energy would be a big enough kind of concept, and I think poorly enough understood, where I could do some damage there, but don't have any immediate terms. But if I was going to, that would probably be it. And then on the discussion with Jeff Snyder, so for those of you guys who aren't familiar, I had a discussion debate. It was spending on some economic topic of like the importance of having elasticity in money. And I basically took the position that while Bitcoin has a perfectly inelastic total nominal supply, it's perfectly elastic at the same time, because the available supply is all there. And as the market needs more money, it can bid the price of money up, and people will deliver it, just as we've seen every time Bitcoin goes up and down. And what I will say is, and Jeff's a person who, while I have a lot of respect for him, and he was someone whose writings I found in 2015, 2016, trying to understand kind of what would happen when the Fed unwound its balance sheet. So I have appreciation for him. He's somebody who, believes that the total money supply needs to be elastic, but he can't articulate, what mechanism by which, because he's not a central banker. He's not a central bank apologist, which is interesting. So I actually think his mind is open. I think I landed some body blows in that conversation. I don't know if he would admit it, but just based on his reaction to some of my points, as well as questions back to him of like, well, why are people? It's like, if you acknowledge that people are choosing Bitcoin and people are adopting Bitcoin increasingly, why is that? It's because the market is choosing a form of money that can't be printed. And so I actually think that he's more open to the idea of Bitcoin than he'll, I don't want to say admit publicly. I think it's just, he's on his own personal journey, and I think he misdiagnoses a problem because of the limitations of old legacy money and can't see Bitcoin and how it solves a problem in its fixed supply, and accepting that it, because it's also able to be easily transactable over the internet, and money could flow from one local economy to a global economy, and different jurisdictions in the world instantly. I think he just fails to appreciate the significance of that. But I found the conversation, like, people can find it. Mark Moss organized it. I wrote my kind of long form view of my opinions on, the importance of inflexibility in total supply, but at the same time, kind of how that actually fits perfectly in with meeting the needs of the market in terms of what it needs for money. So that's on my blog. It should be the first or second thing there if people are interested in it. But I enjoy those type of conversations. There's certain other people that I think are just totally, not very intellectually curious. I don't put that, label on Jeff, and I think he'll come around to Bitcoin probably in the next 2 or 3 years.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Parker. And just to quickly, yes, and it's like, I completely agree. I think a lot of people don't realize the significance of having a bearer instrument that can move at these speeds. That's something that we've never seen before in human history. And I think the implications from just commerce is going to blow everyone's mind away. Anyways, I'll stop talking. Go right ahead, buddy.
Oh, you're good. No, you actually asked the exact question I was going to ask. And I do want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I honestly didn't get to talk much, but everybody asked kind of the questions, and the conversation went exactly how I would have wanted it to go. So this was great. Huge thank you again to Parker, and make sure everybody listening and give him a follow and check out Gradually Then Suddenly, and keep an eye on, I guess, what he's got coming. So sounds interesting. Zaprite, I'm looking forward to the development of that. I am very interested in that software. Everyone that I've seen uses it says it's great, and I think we needed an alternative to what has been offered up to this point. So thank you for doing that again. Do you want to just share how people can get in touch with you or follow you? Any links to that stuff?
Yeah, sure. People can find me, I guess, if they're on Twitter, they probably have already found me, but Parker A. Lewis on Twitter. My blog, graduallythensuddenly.xyz. If you're, I like to think about the book as it will, if Bitcoin's already made sense for you, it will harden your own understanding. But then also, I really encourage people to, read it, give it to friends. Supports me in my work, but also hopefully makes your life easier of being able to prime people with, kind of a really logically ordered way to think about Bitcoin. So you can find the book at thesafehouse.com. So it's Safe Dina Moose's publishing site. It's there. And then, on Zaprite, I like to think it's like, look, my philosophy is, if people don't understand why Bitcoin stores value, they shouldn't be accepting Bitcoin as payment. It's almost kind of setting themselves up for, not having the right expectations, or not being able to execute that strategy with success. So I encourage people, Bitcoiners or non-Bitcoiners alike, it's like, hey, first, help people understand why Bitcoin stores value, why Bitcoin is money. That's really what my book is designed to do. And then, but if you're further down that journey and you've already understood that, then I really encourage people to, whether they're running a business or a senior person helping to run a business, is to encourage, them either directly to set up and give their customers a way to be paid in Bitcoin, or to encourage, to help form a consensus within their business. And so that's what we're doing at Zaprite, providing the tools to make that easy. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us at zaprite.com. You can submit a form. I'll see the form and be able to respond to you. So it's right on our website. But please reach out. Zaprite for payments. Check out the book or gift the book from thesafehouse.com, and then find my blog and Twitter. And I'm here, and I'm pretty accessible and reachable. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, reach out to me, and happy to help you as I can.
Excellent.
As I say, I can confirm he is accessible and reachable.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and listening. Make sure you give Parker a follow, and if you want to follow us to keep up with the spaces, go right ahead. And we do them every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So we will be back here again on Wednesday. And if you're interested in Bitcoin Mentor, you can go to bitcoinmentor.io and you can email one of us or book a free session to learn more about what we do and how we can help you. Anything from self-custody to running a node, any Bitcoin related stuff that you need help
Zaprite.
with. Or using Zaprite, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, get in touch with us and we can help you along with that journey. But I hope everyone has a great day and take care until we talk next time.
Hey, thanks for organizing this, guys.
Absolutely. Really appreciate you coming.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much. Later, team.
See you guys.